terrorism. It's our own people turning against us. And we've seen that happen. We've seen these groups become more empowered and more brave in the things they're doing. Part of that is the internet, because anyone who has a weird hobby, like I have a very strange hobby. I like to look at the insides of watches, and there are so many videos and just all kinds of photographs, and societies dedicated to that. Well, it's the same thing with white supremacists,
right?
And they are very open about how they feel, and they don't identify themselves physically anymore. They don't shave their heads, they don't have the tattoos, they want to blend in, and they are in the military, they're in the police force, they're in schools, they're in neighborhoods, they're everywhere, and they're part of these organizations that are threatening the fabric of America.
It felt like your novel felt like it could actually happen today, right now, in Emory, and your other novels had a little bit more distance with it. But this one felt so right now, and it also felt a little bit more personal. Like I was getting to know you and maybe your politics, or a little bit more that way about you and your thoughts about the world. So
well, it's not I hate that people have framed this as a political thing. Are a lot of people in here are you're close to my age or you're older. Our grandfathers and fathers fought against this sort of ideology in World War II. They died for it. They lost their lives. They lost limb. They lost their peace of mind fighting this ideology and stopping it from entering our borders. And you look at what Timothy McVeigh did. This is not political. We are right and they are wrong. There's no gray in between. There's no explaining it. There's no need to understand it other than they are wrong. And that's the way I frame it in the book, because it's ridiculous to even entertain the thought that they might have a point.
Now, if I didn't already love you as much as I do, I just felt a little bit deeper. So we have Bill Trent back in our lives. It has been 3 years, and he has been in our lives for 13 years. I couldn't believe that. I was like, he feels like he's just been a part of my family forever. And I was a little upset I had to wait 3 years for him to come back and visit, but I'm forgiving of that. But he is an amazing character. He is so simple and so complex at the same time. And he is such a good guy. I want to know a little bit more about how you've created him and how he has changed from 13 years ago, Will Trent, to now Will Trent.
Well, I think the big difference is Sarah is in his life, and she doesn't put up with a lot of crap. She's not the kind of woman who would be doing the dishes while the guy's on the couch playing video games. That's not going to happen. She'd rather do dishes alone.
Right.
And Will is not the kind of guy to do that. He'd much rather do the dishes because, frankly, Sarah's really bad at it.
He's very particular.
He is very particular. And, I wanted to write about someone who had a learning disability but was a hero. He's dyslexic, and it's something that I talk about sometimes more in books, sometimes more than others. And I just wanted him to be the kind of guy you would root for. He's also someone who made a decision about the kind of person he wanted to be. He grew up in state care. He never really had an advocate. He had some good foster parents, some bad ones. And he made a decision as an adult that what he was doing was not working. It was going to land him in prison. And so he said, I'm not going to be that kind of person. I'm going to be the kind of person who tries to do what's right and tries to be a contributor to society. And I have a lot of respect for people who do that. They're out in the world today who are saying, I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to have a moral compass that points in the right direction.
Is he loosely based or closely based on anybody that you?
Well, in some ways, I guess a lot of the guys I write about are sort of like my dad.
I was wondering.
And he's very self-sufficient. You would not want to date him. But as a dad, he was really great. I just remember when I was a kid, anything I was interested in, he would try to find out a way for me to understand it. Like I wanted to know how the phone worked And this was back when you had to pay to rent a phone from Bell South every month. And my dad came home and I had taken the phone apart. And I think that it cost about $1,000, right? And he said, well, what did you do? And I said, well, I just wanted to know what makes it rain. And he said, did you figure it out? And I said, well, not yet. I took all the tape off the wires. And he said, well, let's figure it out. And we put it back together and we figured out that electricity makes it rain.
Talk more into the mic.
Oh,
I
okay.
see you, Joe.
Yeah, you're getting in trouble here.
Turn it this way?
Yes, turn towards you.
Towards me? How's that?
Turn towards you.
Oh, put it in front of her. Sorry. Usually I can just project. I'm not used to having that.
You need one of those Madonna microphones.
I do. Maybe that's what we can fundraise for the library.
It seems like the best way to use money now.
Now I've lost track.
We're talking about Will. So he's a little bit based on my dad, but also I remind people he's fictional because he takes out the trash without being asked. and he is, I think in some ways that when we write characters, we're projecting the way we want the world to be. And,
Right.
And Sarah definitely is a projection of aspirational Karin. She works out a lot, she's very tall. I think every woman has at one point had a disastrous Miss Clairol moment where they tried to dye their hair red. So, she's living the Karin Slaughter fantasy if I was taller and thinner and a lot smarter.
I'm 5'9" in my head all the time, so I understand. Speaking of Sarah and Will together, they are like the perfect couple. They are such a great balance for each other. I had to write some notes down because I was going to be so nervous up here. You're able to balance the romance and the mystery thriller part. How are you able to do that without going overboard in romance or leaving us hanging with the mystery? How do you create that balance with them?
Well, part of it is just that I've written a lot of books, and you learn to be more disciplined. When you write your first novel, my first novel, Blindsided, that was my first published novel, I felt the need to put everything I could in there because I thought no one else is ever going to read a book from me again. So all my revenge fantasies about the nasty old lady down the street and the guy at the sandwich shop who's a douche, they're all in there. He was actually a murderer. Yeah, he's a douche. He thinks it's wonderful. That's character written. So it takes a little discipline, especially to write a relationship. Now, I've spent so many books getting Will and Sarah together. And part of the thing about Will that I remind people is he lies to Sarah quite a lot. He's not doing it to be an asshole. He's doing it because he thinks, well, if I tell her this, then she won't like me. Which in a lot of ways is a cowardly thing to do. And it's that old thing that a lot of people say in relationships, I didn't want to hurt your feelings, which is code for, I didn't have the balls to tell you this. I'm really upset you found out. And so Sarah has to kind of jerk a knot in his ass and straighten him out and say, I can't be in a relationship like that. You've got to be honest with me. Mm-hmm. And he's learning to do that. And Sarah is learning to be more flexible. She's not as strident about things as she was in the beginning of the series.
Right.
And that's the way relationships are. You don't get 100% of what you want in a relationship. But if you can get close enough that you're happy, that's what matters. And so the challenge in The Last Widow, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but usually the end of a series is when people get together. That's the fade out of that. And and the reason is having people together and being happy is very boring. And you think you want them to be happy, but you don't. Because think about your lives. If you're in a nice relationship or marriage, would you really want to write about watching Netflix at night? So unfortunately, I get to murder people and have horrible things happen. And so with The Last Widow, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting after I worked so hard to get them together to do something that physically tears them apart. And they are apart for most of the novel. And they're longing for each other and this sort of thing. But it is a delicate balance, because I'm not writing romance per se. I think I'm writing all kinds of books, you know, if you want, I guess they call it women's fiction, because I'm a woman writing about murder, and domestic violence, and, you know, domestic fiction, and all the other words they use to soften it up when women write about these topics.
Right.
But I'm also writing about people who are in love, and I'm writing about families and different parts of people's lives, like the families they make at work as well. So that's all in there, and that to me is a very important part of the book, because I do write about some really horrible things, and I write about them in an unflinching way. And I think if it was all about the violence, that it would be too much. There has to be moments of silence between people where, you know, there's a foundation of trust, and that's where the hope comes from, is knowing that people care about each other, and no matter how bad things get, they're always going to come back together.
Well, I have to say, my favorite moment in the book was between Sarah and Will. They are apart during majority of the story, and it's really hard. I mean, like, you're gripping for both of them, and you're torn for both of them. And there's this one moment where they're closer together, and the fingertips underneath the door. Oh my God. Trust me, it doesn't matter. You're gonna cry no matter what. Oh my gosh. That was like the pivotal, like, they really are connected no matter what. Like, this could have broken them apart. Maybe it does. I don't know. What's your next book about? But it was really, it showed the power of the relationship to me, and how much they felt for each other.
Well, you know, there are scenes in a book that you really, as an author, you want to get to. And I don't know how other authors manage to do this, but some will move around in the story, and they'll write chapter 10 before they write chapter 5 or whatever. But I have to do it from the first page to the last. So what you read in the first chapter is the first thing I wrote, and the last page is the last thing I wrote. Otherwise, it would just be all the sex and the violence. And that would be a very cohesive story. But I do like to have things build, and I think that comes because I loved watching soap operas, and I loved watching a lot of the TBS classics, you know, like Gilligan's Island. So I have a sense of a cliffhanger. So I learned all my good tricks from television.
Gilligan's Island.
And you know, I'm the generation that grew up on going home to watch Luke and Laura. And you know, first he raped her, and then they got married, so it was a thing. And it's a great love story. And then we were all reading V.C. Andrews, which was incest. But it was a nice love story, you know, so that really, if anything, shapes me as a writer.
Interesting. Not sure where to go with that. I might just leave it. I don't know if you guys ever or always read the acknowledgments at the end. And you do not like people to read the acknowledgments first.
No.
There was, I can't remember which book it was in, but it was like, I don't like people reading the acknowledgments first. If you're reading this first, go read the damn book. And I was like, shit, she knows me. And I stopped, I closed the book, and I went to the front page and started reading it.
So
So
good. You were
I
the
followed
only one
directions.
I worked with. You know, because sometimes there are spoilers in the acknowledgments when you think a certain person who works at a certain place, or, you know, and I started getting these letters from people through Facebook or whatever saying, they all start, imagine my disappointment.
Oh.
And I instantly knew who the killer was.
You kept reading after Imagine My Disappointment?
Oh yeah, because that's when it usually gets good.
Stopped.
No, that's when it gets sent to everybody who works with me.
Okay. So back to my original question about the acknowledgments, is you do thank everybody that helped you with the book, from the coroner's office to the GBI to the APD to the, I don't know, you come up with some really, like, you get a lot of help on your books.
I did, yeah.
And I kind of want to know, how you get the information from them. Like, do you go on ride-alongs? Do you go to autopsies? Do you go to the morgue on a regular basis? Or are they just like all in your Rolodex and you're like, oh, I need to talk to Jack today?
Well, you know, when I first started out, I didn't have these resources, because you can't just call up the police and say, how would you kill somebody?
Quick question.
Kill someone,
I'm a writer. Oh, sorry, I'm a writer.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a situation where you think a white woman doesn't help me, right? I can't imagine what minority authors might run into. So I do have a better network now. Well, the weird thing was, when I toured with my first novel, I would have a lot of men, it was always a man, come up and say, do you want to see an autopsy? Is that code? So my first question was, are you in any way attached to the medical examiner? A lot of them would say, well, no, but I have a friend.
Infamous friend.
Yeah. Does he know your girlfriend in Canada? But I have contacts with the GBI, and actually, David Ralston, who's our Speaker of the House, he represents Blue Ridge, where I go to write, and he's a good friend of my father's, and he introduced me to Vernon Keenan, who was the director, and it was funny because, of course, Director Keenan was a very busy man. I think he's fishing now, very happily. He's retired. But he handed me off to their communications person, who said, I am so glad I met you, because I kept getting these Google alerts for an agent named Will Trent. I kept looking everywhere, just like, who is this? Is someone impersonating a GBI? Yeah, it's like an investigation. But they were so helpful. You know, think about police officers, is most of them join the force that they're with because they want to help people. And they've been very helpful to me. I've had great access to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They're pretty amazing. We're really lucky to have them. A lot of state agencies in law enforcement don't train their staff as aggressively as they do at the GBI. And it's so short-sighted not to do something like that, because a lot of the failures in policing that we see are because of the lack of training. And, you know, everybody talks about they want smaller government, but you don't want a smaller government when you have a cop who hasn't been given the proper training to be out there on the streets, right?
Yeah.
So this is something we should be spending more of our tax dollars on. I'm a big proponent of paying them a living wage. You know, a lot of them would not even make $15 an hour, considering the amount of work they're doing. So, you know, I take all of their knowledge, all the risk they took in the field, and I profit from that.
Okay.
But I do buy them coffee.
That's nice.
And a lot of the people who help me are retired, and most of them are women of a certain age. And if you have ever met a woman of a certain age who's retired, she will tell you exactly what's on her mind, which is fantastic for me. I just love listening to people talk about things that they are fascinated with, because that, to me, I remember I had a very long conversation with a musician for my novel Pieces of Her, and he kept saying, I know you find this boring, and I thought his wife must tell him all the time. Right? And I said, no, you know, please keep going, because those are the details I want. That helps my characters feel more authentic. And, you know, I do make mistakes, I'm absolutely certain of that. But when people read my books, if they're an expert in this field, I want them to see enough to know that I'm really trying to get things right.
They're so detailed. I'm always amazed at it, and I wonder, I'm like, did she get into an autopsy room? Did she hang
I
out with
did.
these folks? I mean, because you get down to every detail, not just like the physical details of the cutting or the livers or whatever, but it's like the sense of being in that room where it's cold and sterile, or where, you know, something sends that chill down your spine. I mean, it is right there, and that's not something I always think that you can get just from someone else telling you a story.
Yeah, and it's true. And you know, a lot of times when you see an autopsy scene on television, they're laughing and making dark, humorous jokes about things. That was not my experience. The medical examiners that I watched took their job very seriously. And they are medical examiners. There's a difference between a coroner and a medical examiner. A medical examiner has an actual degree to be a doctor. A coroner in my town, where I grew up in Clayton County, for instance, he was the local mortician, who was also subsequently busted for running a cocaine ring. But you know, in some counties it's a hairdresser. In some counties it's the sheriff, who has absolutely no interest in you know, looking at an autopsy and saying, yeah, my deputy was wrong to shoot this man, right? So it really is just crazy that anyone who is willing to run for election to be a coroner in Georgia can be a coroner. And those are the experts who are in charge of deciding whether or not something is a murder.
Are you serious? And you're willing to just
Yeah.
run for it?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to have no experience.
No experience required.
I could become a coroner.
You could, absolutely.
I mean, you have more experience, but I could still do it.
Sure, just fine, but you couldn't in DeKalb County because they have a legitimate system here. Yeah, yeah. Well, Clayton County, after this cocaine murder ring, they actually contracted with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to do all their murder investigations. I think they paid them $1 a year. Well worth it. Well worth it.
Okay. Yeah, your acknowledgements are always just so jam-packed. I had to know. I don't want to give any more trade secrets away on your story, on your book. Sorry. You'll still cry, trust me. Is there anything you want to tell us about this story? Because I have a couple more questions after that are general, but.
Well, I mean, we're talking about heavy issues, but when I write a book, I want it to be entertaining. That's my goal, is I want it to have twists and turns, and if you don't care about what's going on in the world and politics and society and all those messages that are in there, if you don't care about that, it will not affect your enjoyment of the story. You know, you can just take it to the beach. But if you want a deeper meaning, there's that too. And that comes from just a long line of crime writers, and a lot of crime novels deal with things that are happening in the world today. And our job, we consider it our job rather, to hold up a mirror to society. And that was one of the goals with this book. I didn't mean it for it to be so topical, but it's really weird when you write a crime novel these days. And we discuss it a lot as fellow crime novelists, saying, you know, I didn't want to write about a school shooting because I thought, what if a school shooting happened, or a mass murder, you know? And the fact is, it's always going to happen. We're just living in a point in our history where there's always going to be a mass shooting. There's always going to be a school shooting that happens. There's going to be some sort of domestic terrorism. That's just part of life right now. And we can't anticipate it, but we can write about it, and we can write out our frustrations with the fact that it keeps happening. And, you know, it's so strange because after the Murrah building was bombed by Timothy McVeigh, all of America, all of policing gathered around and said, we are going to make sure this does not happen again. After 9/11, we did the same thing. But now with this recent spate of killings, we've just kind of thrown up our hands like, well, it happens, you know. And I as an American, I don't understand that, because our history is fixing things, right? Coming together. We invented Velcro, right? As my grandfather said, we won 2 wars and we can print our own money. It's like, why can't we find a solution for this? It just boggles the mind.
Well, I can definitely see that frustration in that holding a mirror to society in The Last Widow. And it is, again, every time I read one of your novels, I'm like, oh, this is the best. And then, you know, next summer comes around and, oh, she did it again. So I love it, and I love having Will back in my life, so thank you. I had a question because I wanted to know where you are with your television and film with all of these great books, because Pieces of Her is going towards Netflix, and then is it Pretty Girls might be going to film?
Might be, yeah. Well, so Netflix I'm really excited about because they've optioned Pieces of Her. I was just in the writer's room in Los Angeles a few months ago, and it was so surreal because I had this moment where I was talking to the writers, and they were talking about budgeting and, you know, all the things. They're not filming in Georgia because of the law. They're filming in Vancouver. They changed that, which I was really annoyed by the whole situation. because my dream from when I first wrote my first book was to have it filmed in Georgia. But, you know, it was so amazing to think, my God, hundreds of people now have jobs because a year ago, I sat down in my pajamas and with my laptop and I wrote this story. I mean, it's just amazing to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll have casting news soon. They want to start filming in March, and then the streaming part of it is really incredible because I think the latest count is they're in 131 countries. And each country, they're going to release it the same day in each country. And depending on where it is, some of them have subtitles, some of them have dubbing, some of them are in English. It just depends on what the format for that country is. So the production is really cool. And they do it locally, so that's neat.
And so you get to be a part of it. Are you going to be producing, being in the writing room?
I'm a producer, and I get consultation, which means, yeah, that's great.
You don't get to tell anybody no?
Well, you know, I will say Charlotte, who's the writer, she's pretty amazing. So she's worked on Fosse Verdon. She wrote a great episode for that. She's worked on House of Cards and Homeland, and the director has worked on Mad Men and NYPD Blue, and the producer has worked on Big Little Lies. So this is a pretty good team. And they know what they're doing. And we've had conversations about characters and what they want to do. And I've always felt really strongly that my book is my book.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to trust people to interpret my story, it's not really an adaptation, it's an interpretation. Then I need to let them do what they're good at, and I'll try to stick to doing what I'm good at.
Well, it sounds like you've got a great team too.
Yeah. Well, the thing I'm going to be mindful of is the accents, because if they make them sound like they're from Florida or Texas, there's going to be a problem.
I understand. Yes, the accents are very important. So I travel a lot, and anytime, I was telling Karin this before, is anytime I travel, I always go into bookstores or into the bookstores in the airport, and the book I look for is Karin's. I'm always looking to see if her book is in the airport, and you know how many different languages it's in. And your book actually came out before I was in France this summer, and was already out in the airport. And you've also gone to #1 bestseller in, is it South Africa and Germany and Holland? Like you're already just all over. So I wanted to know, other than here, right here in this room, who are your favorite fans and your favorite country? Because you have 37 different languages. I'm not sure how many countries that equates to.
126
countries.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And I can't read any of them.
You just trust it's right.
I've seen Dutch, but it looks like a mistake. You know, I'm not second up to you guys. It really, I love my U.S. tour. That to me is the seminal moment, is when the U.S. edition comes out. But specifically in the South, because you guys really get me. You know, and I work very closely with a lot of my translators because I use a lot of idiom and vernacular, and so I get queries saying, you know, what does this dog don't hunt mean? Or why did you say the dogs under the porch is a redneck alarm? So then the difference between a hillbilly and a redneck, and, you know, part of me is like, duh.
I do wonder about the translations, because some things that are so specifically to Atlanta or Georgia are, even outside to Alabama, look different.
Yeah. Well, in Pretty Girls, I used Ewans, because that's something that's used up in the Appalachian area, which, you know, if you go to Blue Ridge, you'll find the waitress might ask, what are Ewans wine? But I try to use that. I try to use as often as I can to make it authentic. But you know, when I do travel in other countries, I'm always aware that I can make mistakes too. One of my favorite people on earth is Kate White. She's a great author, and she wrote this seminal feminist book, A Good Girl's Guide to Getting Ahead, right? And she was on a radio station in England. And they asked her to describe herself, and she said, well, you know, everybody says I'm full of spunk. And So there was a long pause. And if you don't know why that's funny, you have a computer at home, I'm sure. But one time I was in Holland and someone said to me after a very long event, piece of cookie? And I thought, just a piece? I mean, Dutch people are very cheap. Piece of cookie, and that's their equivalent of piece of cake.
Ah.
Yeah, so he was using sarcasm and idiom that made absolutely no sense. So I like when my translators want to know. And that's why I like being in the U.S. though, because I think I'm not going to have to explain anything, especially in the South. They totally get it.
We do understand you, we do. I wanted to have you tell us a little bit, I know Joe mentioned it about the Save the Libraries. I have to say, I was upstairs earlier and